I love the comp that Dane Brugler gave him. He called him a grizzly bear, and I was like,
that was the comp.
Yes,
American grizzly bear.
The American grizzly bear.
Welcome in to the Hot Read podcast for Tuesday, April the 11th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at Broadway Sports Media. We are also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and I'm joined, as always, by producer JT. JT, how are you?
I'm good. I'm tired from reading all day.
Oh, and what could you possibly be reading about?
I don't know. Maybe it's the work of a certain Mr. Dane Brugler that came out today.
Yes.
That I have not put down.
That's crazy because you and I are in the exact same boat. If you follow the draft, then you almost certainly know about Dane Brugler's The Beast, which is his annual draft guide he releases over at The Athletic. Incredible. It is the Bible for folks during draft season in terms of wanting to get all of your info and the most info in one place for literally every single prospect in the draft. So no free shout outs on this show, but we have to give a free shout out to Dane Brugler because we are going to be utilizing his work quite a bit. I think it's really fascinating and everyone should go utilize it. You have to have an Athletic membership, but this alone is worth your Athletic membership for sure, your subscription or whatever it is. It is I think over 300 page document of
308.
Okay. 308 pages of over 1,800 prospects. So if you want to learn about prospects you've never even heard of, it is your source. It's your go-to source.
I love the first paragraph or so on each player. Cause it's not like he doesn't get into the nitty gritty. It's like, he's got 4 brothers. He's from here. He did this. And I'm this is way too much information.
It's Wikipedia entry style writing. It is, let me write a semi-biographical retelling of this player's life. And then I'll mention the tape study that I did. I mean, he works on it. Most draft analysts start November, December. So you get a little head start, mid-season college ball season. This dude is going to start tomorrow on next year's Beast. It's a year-long process for him. So that we're hyping him up like crazy, but he deserves it because he spends a whole year like a maniac putting this thing together. It is just one of the many different draft guides and resources out there for you to use. In addition to this one, we're going to be a resource as we have been for the past couple of days. Again today, JT, just to give the folks at home who are keeping track of where we're at with our our positional series. We're going position by position this year in the 2023 NFL draft. We have already covered 3 of them. We cover the 4th today, all of them on defense. We're going to knock the defensive side of the ball out first before we move on to the juicy offensive players the Titans fans desperately want to see drafted into two-tone blue later this month. But in case you haven't watched those, when you're done watching or listening to this episode, which today we're doing the top 10 edge defenders in this year's draft, which you should know by the title of the episode. We had 2 episodes last week on the top 10 linebackers in the 2023 draft and the top 10 safeties in this year's draft. Both of those episodes you should go check out to learn a bit about those positions. And then yesterday's show was the top 10 defensive tackles in the 2023 NFL draft, plus big money for Big Jeff. We discuss the breaking news over the weekend, Jeffrey Simmons getting his contract, and I give a little bit of insight into how that went down and what it might mean going forward. But today, JT, before we get into our top 10 edge defenders, and in terms of the most interesting board thus far, for me, it continues to get more and more interesting. I have more diverse opinions on the offensive players than I do the defensive players. I feel like for the most part, the consensus in the draft community on these defenders, for me, has been relatively correct so far. I've not moved guys up and down my board a ton as compared to the consensus board. Today, I've got more movement than I've had so far, for sure. I'm not sure if you found yourself disagreeing with the consensus more today or not. That was the case for me. Are you there? Hello.
Oh, were you passing that to me?
That was an open-ended question.
I didn't know. I thought you were
the inferred question was it for you? Did you find it? Did you find the consensus different? according to your opinion.
Yeah, maybe a little more inflection in your voice next time.
I know it was poorly phrased. It really was, because I just kind of trailed off at the end.
No.
Okay.
I'm very
all
much
of that for a no.
I'm very much different, I think, than you today, mostly because my mindset of it is that there's 5 guys, maybe even 6 for me, who are most likely first round players. So like,
right.
For me, there's like 5 or 6 guys who I feel very strongly that will go in the first round. And then that only leaves you like 4 spots for guys who are going to go in the second round as well. So like, it's a very stacked class. So like, I get being cute, but like the bottom line is there's a lot of good dudes, and it gets down to being nitty gritty with what you like better on some guys versus some other guys.
We're
like,
splitting
it's just
hairs.
how,
Absolutely. Yeah, we're splitting hairs on this. And I didn't get cute in terms of moving guys up and down the draft board. You're right. This class of edge players is stacked. We've been talking about it. We mentioned it on yesterday's show. We mentioned thinking that this edge class and this cornerback class, and then maybe the tight end class, were the top 3 positions in terms of both top end talent and depth. I went and counted on the consensus draft board how many players at each position are in the top 100 projected players to go in the draft. And it's different from a big board because this is factoring in positional value as well. So like, there's going to be less running backs that go off the board in the top 100. Doesn't mean that they're less talented as a group. It's because the position's not as valuable. More tackles, more receivers, that kind of thing. But JT, I went through and tallied it all up. The positions with the fewest players inside the top 100, quarterback and tight end, as well as interior offensive linemen, all only have 6 players in the top 100. And then the safety and linebacker groups that we've already covered have 7. The defensive linemen that we covered yesterday have 8. The smallest group is running backs, only have 5. Again, that's a positional value thing. This is a very good running back class. I wouldn't let that deter you from studying these running backs or listening to our running back episode that should be coming up soon. They're worth listening to. It's just, players like Bijan Robinson, who's a top 3 talent in the draft, may not even go in the first round. That's just the nature of the position. The big boy positions are the ones you'd expect, right? It's wide receiver, tackle, edge, and cornerback. The most top 100 players by position belong to, like we said yesterday, like we guessed yesterday, the cornerbacks and the edge players. Both of those positions have 15 guys in the top 100. And we had to basically take those 15 today and narrow it down to 10 and order them. The difference for me from the consensus board in this grouping has much more to do with how I order the guys and much less to do with where I think they should go off the board. I too think there's 5 or 6 guys that are first round talents. I just think maybe some of the guys that people think are the top 3 or maybe more the top 6. And I have a guy or 2 that I think is maybe a fringe top 10 guy for some folks that I think is a bona fide first round talent and a top 3 player in this group. So I'm excited to talk about all that. But before we do, JT, I wanted to talk about an article that came out last night. We're recording this on Monday afternoon. And every week, as he does, I think year round, even in the off season, Peter King over at NBC puts out his Football Morning in America article, which is fantastic. It is another staple within the NFL community. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. Our listeners are familiar with Peter King and his article, but it's one of those weekly releases that pretty much everyone in the NFL community, the media community, many in front offices, they make this appointment reading. And so I do that as well. I was sitting last night reading this article that came out late last night for this morning. And his opening story that he tells, I'm not going to poach as my own. I just want to retell it because I think it is really poignant for this time of year and a great reminder as to what we can and maybe more importantly can't expect to know about the draft before we get into it, right? Before we actually get there. And so I'm just going to read the excerpt from the beginning. I'm not going to read you the whole article. Go give him the clicks that he deserves. Read the article. Most certainly not trying to steal his work here or discourage you from going and reading it because I'm going to read you maybe 5% of it here. The rest is arguably more interesting than this, but the story is fantastic and the kind of thing that only the Peter Kings of the media world can give you because it's a story that's almost 40 years old. That's how long he's been working in NFL media. And so here's what he wrote. He said, I have a story for you. It's a draft story. It's 39 years old from my first month covering pro football. On April 30th, 1984, I was a rookie beat reporter covering the Bengals for the Cincinnati Enquirer, and I walked into the Riverfront Stadium office of first-year Bengals coach Sam Wyche to do a draft preview story. The 12-round draft was on May 1st and 2nd, and my preview story would be in the Enquirer on the morning the draft kicked off. Big draft for the Bengals. They had 3 first-round picks, the 7th, 16th, and 28th overall pick. And then he goes on to say that Wyche asked him when they got into the office, point blank, do you want to know who we're going to draft? He writes, has there ever been a question with a more obvious answer in journalism history? I don't think so. Wyche said, as long as you don't phone anyone in other cities, as long as you don't share this information, I'll tell you. He said that he promised, and in those days, the Associated Press wire and landline telephones were the only ways to share deadline information about the draft. The AP bureau in Cincinnati surely wouldn't rewrite a story from the morning paper in town with the beat writer's speculation on who the Bengals would choose. As strange as it sounded, Wyche wasn't risking a damn thing sharing the information he was about to share. Ostensibly, it got on the good side of the kid beat writer, who was Peter King at the time. In the first round, Wyche said, we're going to take Rick Huntley, linebacker out of Arizona, with our first pick. Then we're thinking Boomer Esiason, quarterback out of Maryland, the lefty, or Brian Blados, guard, North Carolina. Hopefully we can get all 3. He went on to later say they were looking at running back Stanford Jennings out of Furman, Don Kern out of a tight end out of Arizona State, and Bruce Kozerski, center and long snapper out of Holy Cross. Here's where the story gets very interesting, in my opinion. So the next day, in primitive draft coverage times in a makeshift media room at Riverfront Stadium, as the draft rolled over on ESPN, here come the Cincinnati picks, and they did exactly what they said they were going to do months earlier. Here's the sidebar. Later in the afternoon, Peter heard the Bengals were flying Koch and Esiason in from Baltimore to meet the local media, and Peter found the flight info. So he got in his car and drove to the Cincinnati airport. And this is what he writes detailing that part of the story. No security, no lines. Man, were those the days. I went to the gate of the arriving flight from Baltimore. When the flight disembarked, here came the tall Nordic blonde Esiason and the overbulked Koch, and a member of the all-lobby, definitely a member of the all-lobby team if there ever was one. I went up to them and introduced myself and said I was there to drive them to the stadium to meet their new employers. The newspaper guy is driving us, Esiason said incredulously. The best part, they saw my car parked out in the parking lot and wondered how they both fit. Esiason folded himself into the back seat, quasi-bitterly saying, welcome to the effing NFL. After the draft, one of his editors saw him and asked him if he was Nostradamus for guessing the picks correctly in the newspaper article. And he said, no, he's just lucky. And then told him what happened. He said he was stunned, and he still is to this day. Now, the reason I read you verbatim this story is because then Peter King goes on to contrast that with today's pre-draft environment in the media and in the, front office ecosystem of the NFL. Today, things are a little bit different than that. He wrote, I thought about this Saturday evening when I was swapping info, or trying to anyways, with a well-connected operative from a team with a pick in the top 12. Could be the Titans, by the way. This person said, quote, I don't know what's happening in front of us. Anything. Then he paused. Quote, I'm not kidding. No one wants to hear that, but the longer I'm in the business, the more I absolutely believe the draft mystique until the final hours on that Thursday of the first round. As one agent with 30 years of experience told Peter King on Saturday, quote, the mocks this year are going to be laughable. So many guys repeating the same thing, trusting guys who might not know anything. That is wisdom coming from one of the elder statesmen of NFL media, one of the most reliable guys when it comes to his sourcing, his connections within the NFL. And it's a poignant reminder this time of year as we really ramp up our draft coverage, ramp up discussing and anticipating what's going to be an awesome and very fun night for everybody. We don't know what's going on. We have no idea. And so that's a intentionally bad way for us to transition into trying to tell you what's going to happen based on our evaluation of these players, which is fun. And frankly, JT, I think half the fun is the fact that no one ends up being totally right. If it was very easy to predict these things and NFL front offices and media members and draft analysts and scouts alike all agreed on these players, or it was easy to evaluate them, or it was easy to guess what other teams were going to do, then we'd just all be right every year, and we wouldn't have a reason to talk for 3 months about who's going to go where. That's half the fun, trying to guess and be right and figure out these teams before they tell you what they're doing, before they show their hand. And it's getting significantly more difficult these days. I know that JT, you and I are buddies. We do a draft pool every year where we all submit a first round mock on the day of. We put in our last guess at how the first round is going to go, and then score that and put money in. And it's a fun way to gamble on the first round, because it's what degenerates got to do. You got to find a way to put a little juice on everything when it comes to sports. Usually the winner got like 3 or 4 picks exactly right, maybe 5. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I remember thinking back, trying to go back. I think our best year was like during COVID. I think I got like maybe 10 or 11 right that year. Not to brag or anything, but I've been in the when we for 3 years.
You did lose the competition that year to me, so
yes,
not to brag,
but we went to the tie.
Do you remember how I won that one?
Good old
tiebreak. Yeah. We had the same number of points, and so we both took a guess at who would be the first player off the board in the second round. And I said, "Oh boy,
T. Higgins,
your Bengals are taking T. Higgins, bud."
And I was like, Bengals needed a linebacker, and I picked a linebacker who didn't go until the 5th round. So there you go. That's how it goes.
Just a bit outside.
I'm a little scared for this year, because if we are like in our little friend pool there that's going to do this again, if we are the people that are informed and we're scared about how we're going to do, I don't think they're going to get ones.
Well, and we don't have an excuse anymore, right?
No, we really don't.
We are supposed to win this pool. And so naturally we're not going to. We're like every college basketball analyst who enters the draft pool with their family, and then grandma wins and they come in dead last, even though it's their job to know these things. It's just the way that the world works. All right. Speaking of knowing things, JT, you and I know a thing or two about this Edge class because we've been doing our homework in anticipation for today's episode. We are almost at the 20-minute mark. So without further ado, let's get into our top 10. We've been mentioning our honorable mentions before we get into our top 10 list. I've not looked yet at your list, JT, because I always find it more fun to compare and contrast once we are recording and I can react genuinely and not have to be the I just can't stand or do that one more time. All right. Pretend that you're reading it for the first time. I can't do it. It's bogus. So I'm taking a look here, and good. Okay. So we don't have the exact same draft board. There's some differences on our big boards here. I don't see you having written down any honorable mentions. I don't have any either. So if you don't have any, I'm happy to just jump into our top 10. Does that sound all right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch outside our top 10. You can
look at, that's why I didn't do it either, because there's like 10 of them.
Derek Hall, Byron Young, just to name, but like you know that they're going to be like, I didn't do any of them because there's nothing else to say, but like, yeah, these guys are still going to be 3rd round picks. They might be late 2nd, 3rd round picks. They're still really good, but like,
they're all going to
doing
be
top
day 2,
10,
maybe day 3 guys. Right. Yeah. Derek Hall out of Auburn, Andre Carter, the 2nd out of Army, which is a guy that's really fallen down draft boards. I remember him being very high, very early. Zach Harrison out of Ohio State, Byron Young out of Tennessee. Like, these are guys that are all still, those 4 I just listed are all still within the top 100. And yet they're not on either of JT or I's draft board top 10 for the defensive edge guys. The guys that we do have on our big boards here, let's see, how do we want to break this up? Let's do the first 4 on our boards, 7 through 10, because that's kind of
how we've been doing it. Yeah.
Well, no, we've been doing 5 and 5. I want to cut off to 4 and 6 here, and I think you can tell looking ahead why I might want to do that.
Yeah. So I'll run down mine here first.
Okay. Yeah. Read us off your 10th through 7th guy.
At the number 10 spot, I have Keion White from Georgia Tech. Mm-hmm. Number 9, Felix Anidike-Uzomah from Kansas State. Number 7, Adetomiwa Adebawore from Northwestern. Flub that. It's okay. We're good.
Count the bucket.
And then number 6, BJ Ojulari from LSU.
Okay, relatively similar for me. I have Adetomiwa Adebawore out of Northwestern as my number 10 edge defender. Felix Anidike-Uzomah out of Kansas State is my edge 9. Myles Murphy out of Clemson is my edge 8. And BJ Ojulari is my edge 7. Let's start with
Let's start with the ones we have the same.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So we both think that BJ Ojulari, Felix Anidike-Uzomah, and Adetomiwa Adebawore are all in this bottom half of the top 10. Why don't we start with the Northwestern product himself, Adetomiwa Adebawore. I'm going to say it as many times as I can because I'm very proud that I've nailed this pronunciation at this point. JT, you can start here. What were your thoughts on Adetomiwa and his game, the tape, and everything you looked over on his part?
So a trend with, of course, I always have a trend for these top 10s, it seems.
Indeed.
But one, especially today, is just speed. Like speed on the edge is something that's my favorite, and that's probably maybe why I have him a little bit higher than you do. He ran a 4.4940, which is the fastest ever for a player over 280 plus pounds. He's 282 last weigh-in, 6'2". Big dude who runs super fast.
That's a 97th percentile 40 time by the way.
He's so got
not
explosiveness.
Just fast for a big guy, fast for any guy.
Yeah. If he's got explosiveness, if he can refine some of those traits on the outside and work on his moves a little bit, getting to the quarterback a little bit, he did really well last year getting to the quarterback, 80.3 pass rush grade. But it wasn't in that upper echelon tier of elite guys in this in this class. So, but yeah, that's speed. Crazy, man.
It is crazy. You look at his mock draftable web and his measurements across the board from an athleticism, explosiveness, agility, size standpoint. They're all great except for one, and that's his height. At 6'1" and 5/8 inches, he's 4th percentile for height, not super tall, but he's got really good length despite not being very tall. He's 63rd percentile arm length, almost 34-inch arms, just an 1/8 of an inch off. And then his weight, like you mentioned, 282, that's 87th percentile. His bench press, broad jump, vertical jump, 40-yard dash, 10-yard split, all of those are almost above the 75 percentile mark. His 10-yard split is 73rd percentile. His vert and his broad jump were both nearly in the 90s. So this guy's explosive, and he's really big, and he's got nice length. He's just not tall. So on paper, I'm with you. There's not anything to dislike about this guy. You go and you look at his year-on-year progress in college. He improved every single year. Man, it sounds like I'm starting to talk myself into moving him up my board, but I've got reasons why in just a moment that I wasn't a huge fan of his. So give me a second. But his run stop rate was on par with the average, 5.7%, well above average pass rush win rate, 14.3%. He had a pretty consistent year. I mean, you look at his game-on-game performance, and there's not a ton of outliers. He has one outlier against Maryland, had an awesome game, best of his year, and then followed that up with an outlier game against Iowa, a very good team, mind you. Well, one of the better teams he faced in terms of talent, at least. Not very good as strong, okay? They've got a very good unit in the defense. Their offense, not quite as much. But besides those two games, very consistent player. The things about him that made me, and again, he's my 10th edge in a class of stud edges. So I would take this guy on day 2 in a heartbeat. If he's still there for you in the 3rd round, pull the trigger. The things that I weren't crazy about with him are his play strength on tape. Don't quite match the play strength that I think you could project based on his measurements and his combine performance and all of that. And he still looks like he's just a little bit raw in his technique, right? Like we talked a lot yesterday about hand usage. We talked about speed to power, and those things are nice for him, but he doesn't have a ton of diversity in his toolbox from a pure edge rusher standpoint. He's not the bendiest guy out there. He plays a little bit stiff. So there were just certain things. It was really the tape for me that made me think this guy has a ceiling pretty comparable to a lot of these other guys. I think that he could be a stud edge rusher in the NFL. He's got the size for it, at least. I'm not sure if he's going to be a guy you can plug and play. He may take a year or two to really develop into that star player.
Let's move on to our second one that we had in common here in BJ Ojulari. We both ranked him our seventh best, I believe. Seventh? Sixth? Seventh best on both of our lists. He is an interesting guy that I put at 7th, mostly because he's really productive.
Brother, obviously. That's,
of his brother. Yeah,
he's got a brother in the NFL.
Story.
All right, the next guy we're going to talk about is
He was really productive during his time at
Crazy
LSU.
productive.
127 pressures in 3 years. The thing that just like held him back from being, I think, and what will hold him back from being a first round guy is just he's a little undersized, and with that lack of size, a lack of power, that just he's not a guy who's going to be a bull rusher, but he's got the traits to be able to still get to the quarterback, which was what makes him still desirable, but just not as desirable as some of these like mammoth of people on the outside here in this draft class. But still, production wins out in the NFL, and if a team can find him and make him still super productive in the NFL, he's going to be a great steal in the second round.
Yeah, I agree. This dude's a twitchy player. That's the number one thing that jumped out to me on tape. He's a pure pass rusher. He's very, very talented coming around the edge. 21 years old at 6'2", 248. He's very small for the position, 15th and 10th percentiles respectively. His broad jump and vertical jump are much better. So despite his size, the twitchiness translates to his testing. He's got some explosiveness to him. Very big hands, does not matter. But his arm length is impressive despite being short. Again, these shorter guys for edge players, if they're short and they're a highly ranked edge player, you can almost guarantee that they are going to have longer than you expect arms. And this guy does 34 and a 4th inch arms. That's 77th percentile. So reach wise, not going to be concerned trying to come around the edge. If this guy were to go higher than we expect, and just for reference, good job, Easton, reference, he is the 46th overall player on the consensus draft board on NFL mock draft database. He is their edge 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you and I are higher on him than the consensus. We have him as our edge 7. The things about him that I thought he could end up proving some folks wrong with in their evaluation, the thing that I constantly saw, well, not constantly, but a couple of places I saw where folks were just not crazy about him. And for this reason, I kind of disagree entirely. The reason why I think that he could be a bigger deal than most folks are anticipating is his explosiveness off the edge and how he uses his pass rush moves. How can I phrase this? He's one of the better guys when it comes to not pulling a pass rush move out of his butt and just going with it because he hadn't tried it in a while. He seems to, at least on tape, and from folks that have studied him even more than I have pointed this out in different videos that I've watched. He tailors the way that he approaches the game plan, not just from a defensive line standpoint, but from his standpoint. Very intentionally, he seems to tailor his moves to what his opponents are worst at. He's got a very, unlike the last player we talked about in Adebawore, he does have a pretty nice toolbox of moves that he can employ against the offensive lineman he goes up against. When you look at his numbers from college, he had 3 good years, not really any improvement, but he started with a very, very high floor, 70s for all of his PFF grades in his 3 years in college, well above average pass rush grade, well above average true pass set pass rush grade, well above average pass rush win rate at almost 20%. His run stop rate is 4.5%. And that's why he's not higher for me. He's not a run stopper. He's not super versatile in that way. And he doesn't have the size to be versatile in the way that you could maybe kick him inside. In one of the gaps. He's a true edge player. So he had nice sack production in college. The thing that I think folks get upset with, JT, and I don't know if you were seeing a lot of this, but a lot of folks try to box these edges into categories based almost exclusively on how well they were able to get after the quarterback and sack the quarterback in college. And in college, sacks are just as, if not more, fluky and non-predictive a stat as they are in the NFL. Some of these college programs simply don't ask these stars to try to sack the quarterback, whereas some just say, pin your ears back and go, right? Like it's difficult for me, and I'm curious if it was the same way for you, watching Georgia guys, for example, who clearly aren't being asked to try to sack the quarterback. They're being asked to contain or to pressure or collapse the pocket or respect the run or whatever it may be. Whereas you look at a guy like, I don't know. I mean, this is a decent example of one, but can you think off the top of your head any of these edge guys that you were just like, how did they have so many sacks? How are they so explosive from a production standpoint? It's typically the schools where they're the stud on defense, right? Like they are a Pac-10 or maybe a smaller ACC school, and it's like, this is the dude on the team that you have to defend against, like a Georgia Tech guy, for example, that we may be talking about here in a couple of minutes. So those were my thoughts on him. JT, there's one guy you had in your bottom half of the top 10 that I did not, and that person is, do you know off the top of your head? I've forgotten already.
Keion White.
Keion White, yeah, okay, yeah. So the Georgia Tech guy that I was referencing. Tell me what you thought about Keion White. He's on my board as well, but I have him higher.
Yeah, so Keion White for me, once again, it kind of just, when I look at his game, I think there is somebody that just did everything that he does better, you know?
Yes. He's kind of the Publix brand of this class. Like if you're looking for the off-brand that's still very good, Keion White's your guy.
And so Keion White, he was still productive in his only year starting at Georgia Tech. And it kind of came out of the gate flying against Clemson with his one of his best games of the year, 81.3 grade in that game. He's a really good pass rusher. There's just a lot of guys in this class that also pass rush and have the more size and ability that you're looking for. And his size is still really good. He's 6'5", 285, and he's got good speed, but there are bigger guys, 280 plus, who also just have really good speed as well. And when I look at it, I think his tape's really impressive, but also, and you can agree with me with this or not, like, even though he has comparable speed to some of these guys, the play that in competition that some of these other guys were playing against is just a lot better and more closer to the NFL level.
Yeah, I agree. This is a guy that, I don't know if you saw this in your study of him, but there's a reason why he doesn't have a whole lot of experience at the edge position. He changed positions in college. He started at Old Dominion as a tight end, I believe, his first 2 seasons, and then spent his last 2 seasons with Georgia Tech. Or was he with Georgia Tech just this last season? I forget.
He at least started with Georgia Tech this last season.
Okay, so yeah, he's got at least 1 season with Georgia Tech and then at least 2 with Old Dominion, but at a different position. You saw a lot of rapid improvement from him. Like you mentioned, he came out of the gate swinging despite not having a lifetime of experience at the edge position. This guy, if I had to describe his game in one word, it's explosive, and that gets thrown away around way too often with draft discourse. But this guy truly is explosive off the edge. His size and speed combo is really ridiculous. For reference, on the consensus board, he is edge 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He is my edge 5. So whereas you're more in line with the consensus, JT, I think that this guy has all the goods to be a stud in the NFL. And really the number one reason why I am higher on him than most is because of maybe the same reason you're lower on him. This guy is really well-rounded and really similar to some of the guys that are being considered as top 10 picks at the edge position. He's just slightly worse than them in a lot of categories. But I think he's not a whole lot worse, and I think that he's getting discounted too much for being maybe the runt of the elite edge litter. You look at his web on mockdraftable.com, he's not got a weakness anywhere. Height, weight, length, vertical, broad jump, bench press, all of them are at or above average. His height and weight, 6'5", 285, so 79th and 91st percentiles, 34-inch arms, 69th percentile. His vertical and broad are both above average, and he's got a really impressive bench press. So like his play strength is just as impressive as his size. His explosive tendencies work really well. And it's the reason I'm guessing probably more of the reason why his repertoire is a little bit on the smaller side. Another reason for that is because, again, he's played this position for at most 2 years, maybe just 1. I think he's a second or a third round guy in a heartbeat. I would take him in the second. If I was a team looking for an edge player and some of the best guys were already off the board, I expect him to be the best guy on my edge board still available on day 2. But if he went at the end of the first round, wouldn't shock me, whereas it may shock a lot of other folks. He played primarily at edge in his time at Georgia Tech, and his skill set certainly matches that better than the other positions they had him play in. But his size is something that he uses to his advantage very, very well. When you look at his stats from last year, played in 12 games, almost 600 defensive snaps, got to the quarterback 7 times with 7 sacks and 4 hits, 30 QB hurries. So this guy was laying on the pressure on a regular basis. Very, very elite numbers from a run defense grade and a pass rush win rate metric, and a very above average run stop rate. Whereas I wasn't as high on the last guy we mentioned because of the fact that he wasn't as versatile. Keion White does have that versatility as a run stopper, an edge rusher. And I think he also, with his size, frankly, has the versatility to move and be a 3-down player that you can move inside and outside. A little bit of that JJ Watt archetype where you've got a guy who's a very talented edge player, but has the size and the skills necessary to wreak havoc on the inside if you need to line him up between a tight end and a tackle, or a tackle and a guard. I think that you absolutely could have him be up front in a 4-3 look, and he would be just fine. It's really just that repertoire and the experience that I want him to build on. But the reason why I have him so high is, again, he's very raw. He's changed positions. I think he's not even near his ceiling at this position, despite already being 24 years old and a redshirt senior. I throw those things out the window because in terms of being an edge player, this guy's really young.
Yeah, and that's why he's probably ultimately my number 10. It's because he's young, but he's probably, out of all 10 on my list here, he's the most raw. Right? Like these other guys are a little bit more experienced, which is why he moves to my 10. The last guy out of our 7 through 10 here is Felix Anidike-Uzomah, who we both had at number 9.
Yeah. So you want to start with your thoughts on him?
Yeah. So I'll start with him. And some people might question why we have him so low, considering his stats over the last 2 years. I mean, he had 21 sacks the last 2 years. But once again, sacks are not everything, right? No. I think after you take it away, his playmaking ability, he has that, which merits him a top 10 spot on this list here. His all-around play is just, it leaves a little bit to be desired. He has the size and he has the ability. He's 6'3", 255, so he's not as big as some of these guys in the weight area. Mm-hmm. However, he still is able to get it done on the outside. His just, besides the playmaking ability of getting to the quarterback, he leaves a little bit more to be desired outside of some of these other guys.
No, I agree. From a measurement standpoint, he's not a shrimp by any means, but he is making sure. Yeah, he's below average on all of these metrics. Arm length right at 49%, so an average arm length, which, come on, load. There we go, 33.5-inch arms. 6'3" and 1/8 inches tall, 255 pounds. His weight is probably the most concerning of those metrics. When you look at how he produced in college, you're totally right. The 13 and 8 sacks he had in the last 2 years are very tasty looking for a lot of NFL teams. He's got an above average run stop rate of 8.1. It's actually borderline elite. He does have an elite pass rush win rate number at 15.9%. And his grades on all of those things are average or well above average. A consistent player game to game, kind of tailed off towards the end of the year last year. Makes you wonder whether or not when he started to play better competition, or maybe things got a little bit more stiff in terms of the nerves, the things at stake. Maybe he gets a little bit tight in the spotlight, or maybe he's a guy that knows he's going to be a stud in the NFL and he's kind of phoning it in to end the year. Looking at overall at this player, very, very bendy. That's the number one thing on tape that stood out to me, JT. Bend is another word that's thrown around like crazy, and it's a marquee trait you're looking for in edge defenders. How well can they contort their body and get around the corner to get to the quarterback in the most efficient possible path. This dude has it. He's able to consistently get underneath offensive tackles, and it makes his life a lot easier, and it makes him capable of overcoming the size differential. He can improve in an area of just setting the edge. As a run defender, he's good, but not great. And on tape, a number of times you see the ball carrier get around the edge on him, and that's something that he just needs to work on his positioning. But he can be an every down edge player. I don't see him as a guy that's limited in his rotational ability. His tape demonstrates his ability to play on every down and in most every situation as an edge guy. So I think he's going to be a good, not great second round player. Not a whole lot of additional information from me. JT, I think that does cover our first 5 guys we mentioned. And so we can move to the next crop of them. Oh, no, not quite. Not quite. There's one more guy who you're higher on than me. He's my, let's see here. He's my defensive edge 8.
Number
and that's,
8.
Yeah,
and
number 8,
mine,
Myles
he'd be
Murphy.
my number 5.
Yes, that's Myles Murphy out of Clemson. So I can go ahead and explain why I have him a little bit lower than you, certainly lower than the consensus. On the consensus board, Myles Murphy is edge 4, the 16th overall player, definitely a first-round draft pick according to the consensus. But for me, I don't think that he's worthy of that. Do I think he's not going to go in the first round? It wouldn't shock me at all. I mean, I would even potentially put money on it depending on the line you could get. But I think that teams are probably a little bit higher than I am on him. The things about him that stood out to me, JT, that I just was not a fan of, as I pull up his measurement numbers here, it wasn't his measurement numbers, although he does have one very fun one. I feel bad for this guy. You look at his web, and he's got one that just doesn't exist. That's his hand size. He's the 0th percentile. 0th. I don't even think that's a percentile. I'm pretty sure percentiles go 1 to 99. I don't think you can be 0. Somehow he is at 8.5-inch hands. But other than his very tiny itty bitty baby hands, he's got good height, good weight, 70th and 60th percentile. He's almost north of 270 and almost north of 6'4". He's got decent length, 33 3/4 inch arms, right around the average. His production in college was relatively consistent, although he did peak in his first year in terms of his PFF grade, an 85 in his first year. Looked like an elite player, and then had good years of 79s in 2021 and 2022, an above average rusher and above average run stopper. So Easton, what is it that you don't love about this guy? I really don't like the way that he bends. I really don't like the way that he utilizes his hips. It's again on tape. And that was kind of the common theme for me. I was looking at the numbers on these guys and reading breakdowns and looking into statistics and was like, okay, I like that. And then I watched the tape and I'm like, hang on a second. This is not the same thing that I was reading. I'm not seeing what I was reading. His approach to the edge position is a little bit different, in my opinion, than some of these other guys. He does do a very good job. Obviously, he's being considered a first-round draft pick. But generally speaking, transitioning his game from college to the NFL, I think that the way that he is unrefined in his bendiness, unrefined in his just center of gravity, and the way that, again, he doesn't bend at the hips the way that you would really want somebody to at the edge position. His bull rush, he's sinking way too often. He would be unstoppable if he was able to sit in that bull rush a little bit more consistently and a little bit more effectively, I guess, is the way that I'm trying to portray this. His speed to power is also just, it's fine. It's not great. I think he's going to be an every down edge player for sure. He's got good power, but his speed just isn't really there for me. So if he wins in the NFL, if he's better than I think that he's going to be, it's going to be just as a powerful bull rusher whose technique is polished by the coaches that he goes to play for. I think he's fine, but not great. You think he's got some great potential. What did you see in Myles Murphy?
I do. The word that you used right there, powerful, is the one that I had on the first thing I said in my notes.
There's no doubt. He is a powerful dude.
He is a really big and powerful dude. I believe he is 6'4", 6'4", and
6'4" and 5/8.
5/8. I believe his weigh-in here, he weighed a little bit less than what he did in college. So actually, compared to his a couple different websites, with Mock Draftable, he's 268, so 70th percentile and 60th percentile respectively. Yep. Why I have him a little bit higher than you on my board, of course, he is my number 5. He is your number 8. I think he has one of the highest floors of any player. I mean, if you're going to look at what he's going to produce in this first year, I'm kind of projecting him to be a Trayvon Walker kind of level production without the hype. Like, Trayvon Walker was still a fine player this past year. It's just as the first overall, you were expecting a little bit more out of him personally. I think a lot of their metrics kind of add up a little bit to the same as well. Myles Murphy is nowhere near sniffing the top 5 to 10. Although someone could really fall in love with him. Exactly, me too.
Well,
where he could fall
I've seen
10
him
to 15.
The top, like, rounds 10, 11, 12. Not for me, but
it's just, I think he's going to have the same production, and he's got that consistent production that maybe like Trayvon Walker had last season, except he just doesn't have the hype. So he's not going to get like crucified for it like Trayvon Walker did.
Yeah. All right. How about we take the next 6 guys? We've got 6 through 1. Let's do groups of 3. So let's do our 6 through 4 here. My edge 6 is Keion White out of Georgia Tech. I've already mentioned him. We've talked about him. My edge 5 is Nolan Smith out of Georgia. And my edge 4, a little bit lower on this guy, Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. JT, who are your next 3 guys?
So my number 6, this is going to be one, spoiler alert, maybe a little bit, that's going to have the highest difference between both of us here. McDonald out of Iowa State. Number 5, Myles Murphy, who we just talked about. And then number 4, Nolan Smith from the University of Georgia. So let's start with him because he is my number 4 and your number 5. I'll let you take the floor first with him.
Sure. So he is one of those guys that we came away from the combine and he was the buzz, right? He was in this position group, one of the 2 or 3 guys who most impressed folks. I joked on Twitter a couple of weeks ago about how his web on Mock Draftable, it's literally the time 10:30. I don't know if this is reverse, but like he's got nothing filled in for height, weight, arm length, hand size, and everything filled in for broad jump, vertical jump, 40-yard dash, 10-yard split. Dude is a shrimp with 4 rockets up his butt. That is the best way that I can describe Nolan Smith. His height, 6'2 and 1/8, 15th percentile. Weight, 2nd percentile, 238. I'm going to repeat that, edge player, 238. Arm length, 32 and 5/8 inches, only 17th percentile. Hand size, 9 inches, 5th percentile. Now, the freaky athleticism. All 95 or better for the next 4 numbers. 10-yard split, 152. 40-yard dash, 4.39. 4.3, sub 4.4, 40-yard dash. And by the way, he mentioned at his pro day that he wished he'd been able to run it again because that was like according to him, the very slowest time that he had been putting up. He thinks he can run much faster than that. Vertical jump, 41.5 inches, 98th percentile. Broad jump, 128 inches, 95th percentile. His legs are springs. His muscles are jet fuel. Like, this guy has the juice. Okay. From a college production standpoint, I'm going to pull up his numbers on PFF here because he's one of those guys, the Georgia defense. It's just difficult to figure out how he's going to translate to the NFL because the Georgia defense has so many studs year in and year out. It's really hard to be able to tell who is going to play where and how well. The last 2 years, he had an 83.8 and 85 PFF grade. Okay, because this guy's a stud. Like, there's no denying he's very good at pretty much everything. His pass rush grade, run defense grade, run stop win rate, all in the ceiling of the elite. His run stop rate is almost off of this chart here, 14.9%. His pass rush win rate, if you've been paying attention to these that I've been mentioning with guys, it's been all in the teens, right? 25.5% pass rush win rate. This guy eats rushing the passer. He's not a big sack guy. He doesn't have the sack numbers that people love to laud. He has, is that right? That's a typo. I'm going to double check this on the other. Yeah, okay. That's a mistake on this website. He had 2 last year and 7 the year before. Not a whole lot of hits either, 5 and 3, but hurries. He's got 30 of those in the last 2 years. So he's getting after the quarterback in his ability to win, as demonstrated by his pass rush win rate. Don't be deceived by those numbers. That is a result of the Georgia defensive line being quirky statistically as compared to the rest of them. He's somebody that really, when you hear him talked about around the league, if he was, JT, I don't even know, 20 pounds heavier and an inch and a half taller, he would be a bona fide top 5 edge player and probably a top 15 pick in this draft. I have no doubt in my mind. The problem is really primarily his size. It's hard to find an issue with anything else he does. This is from NFL.com. It was a quote from an anonymous NFC scout, a national scout. So one of the big boys in an NFC front office. He said about Nolan Smith, quote, "You worry about him holding up for 17 games with his size. Not worried about the toughness, but I'm just not sure if he can carry more weight without it slowing him down." So that's the concern. teams have been doing medical evaluations on him, trying to get his BMI, trying to figure out through science and technology, how many pounds can we put on this guy without him slowing down? And some teams are going to think we just can't make this guy faster or make this guy bigger without making his speed, which is his winning trait, disappear, because quickness truly is the thing that he is amazing at. JT, when you watched the tape, was it that speed around the edge that stood out to you as well?
Oh, for sure. Totally. Like, I mean, a 4.39 40, he captivated both of us and the rest of the media section.
More like a cornerback blitzing off the edge, like a nickel
he really
corner
does.
than an edge player.
While none of this really matters, it's just kind of funny to look at. Of course, Mock Draftable is a good little tool, but I just have to laugh. Like, you have like his comparisons of his webs with like edge players, and then also just his athletic traits compared to everyone.
Right.
Like, some of the people that he most like closely like is next to is like Cordell Patterson, Rashee Rice from this year, and Adrian Peterson. So right.
A bunch of
this guy's an edge
players. Yeah,
but like the production is still there, even though
it is,
and it's kind of a shame that he tore his, I think it was a torn pectoral that ended his season early this past season.
Yeah.
It would have been really interesting to see, especially in that college championship push, what he could have done. And maybe if he could have played against these bigger named competition, if his stock could have rose, I guess is the correct
risen, one might say. Right.
Whatever.
Every 10.
all of them.
All the tenses.
But yeah, he's just a little smaller than you would like him to be. However, I am one of those people who wouldn't be surprised if we see him go.
You said, I don't care is basically.
I don't care. And right. I think there might be
Yeah.
a couple of teams who are just salivating at the thought of him being on your outside, and could pick him anywhere between the 8th pick all the way to the 12th pick. And that maybe has to do with he's one of these other players, like I said yesterday with Kalijah Cansey, that if you put him in the right scheme with the right other people on the line there, that he's going to be not your main piece on that defensive line. But if he's just paired up with another stud on that defensive line, like, it's going to be a lot harder to stop him.
Okay, the last two guys we have to talk about here are Tyree Wilson and Will McDonald. I want to start, if we can, JT. Can we start with Tyree Wilson?
Sure.
Because I've got Will McDonald much higher than you, and I kind of want to save him because he's a guy that I have to rant on. So let's talk about Tyree Wilson, who is my edge 4. He's your edge 3. Spoiler, sorry. But give me your thoughts on Tyree Wilson. Let's just cover all the outliers while we're at it, right? Because from a athleticism standpoint, the ultimate outlier in this group is Nolan Smith. And from a size standpoint, the ultimate outlier is Tyree Wilson. His production doesn't quite match the altitude in which he's being projected to go, like a top 3 player. I saw Chris Sims today talking about how he thinks he's a lock for the Cardinals at the 3rd overall pick. We'll see about that. I think that teams would be really, really buying into him a little bit too much, buying into the traits. This is a projection-based guy for sure. How did you project him, JT?
Same thing. He's not going to fall out of like the top 20. It's just really hard right now, considering that he really hasn't done any athletic testing, especially with that injury. Like, I'm not someone who's always like, I need to see it. But with him, when you have all these other guys who did their athletic testing and are like known commodities, it's really hard to like see where he could like rank with all them.
Well, let me stop you there, because that's the thing. Known commodities with guys like Bryce Young, who their athletic testing wasn't going to be the thing that sold them anyways, right? He could have tested and you've been like, yeah, but it's small, whatever. That's the only knock. But look at the tape. Okay, we can just go based off the tape. Tyree Wilson's the opposite. The thing that he was going to win and improve his draft stock on was the testing, and he did. But he didn't do a lot of it because he's got a broken foot that he's still ailing. I think he's broken the same foot twice now. He's dealt with multiple injuries that have cut his college career shorter than it otherwise could have been. He's not a guy that can rely on that tape. The tape tells you he should be going in the 2nd round, but his traits tell you he might be the 1st overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that he maybe lacks compared to these other top 4 or 5 guys is that he's just not as explosive, and with his size, you might want to see him be a little bit more explosive. If you're like, if you want to say he's like should be the 3rd overall pick, right? Like you want more explosiveness in a guy who is 6'6" and 271, you know, like that's how I'm expecting a 3rd round overall pick to be. Like if you're that size, you have to back it up a little bit. He ultimately does not have that, but I'm still not going to knock his size and what he was able to do at that size in his college play, which is why I'm going to stick him at 3.
Yeah, we keep talking about his size. Let's clarify just how big this guy is. 6'6" and 1/8 inches tall, 95th percentile. 271 pounds, 68th percentile. So a big guy he carries that weight well because he's so freaking tall. It's the length that is ridiculous, though. And with the edge player, the matchup on the edge of the trenches between the edges and the tackles, that's the number one thing we talk about, right? What's the length like? Who's going to get the upper hand? Who's got the reach on their opponent? Who's going to be able to capitalize on getting their hands on somebody and keeping them from getting their hands on you? Tyree Wilson's that guy. From all available data, his wingspan somehow is significantly more impressive than his height. 6'6" and 1/8 inches tall. You're sitting there thinking, oh, awesome, very cool. The average person, JT, your wingspan is equivalent to your height. It's supposed to be roughly equivalent. Now, if you have longer arms than usual, they'll be bigger. Shorter arms than usual, it'll be shorter. At 6'6", his wingspan is 7'2". His wingspan is an inch shorter than Giannis Antetokounmpo is tall. This guy's got arms for days. He's got pockets on his knees. Like, that's this kind of guy. And I remember you and I watching him walk around. He did an interview with the NBC booth in the Radio Row at the Combine, and he walks past, and we both are just mouths agape. He's a wonder to see in person. It's really ridiculous. His athletic... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, super Chandler Jones vibes with him, with his size and everything. That's what I was gonna say. Like, if you're like just listening to us and want to like and haven't seen this guy and want to like imagine what he looks like, just like Chandler Jones, maybe with his play, not so much Chandler Jones, maybe a little bit like a Chandler Jones light, but like his size and like what he looks like.
Right. And the frustrating element to this is, again, we can't talk about what we think about him from a traits standpoint, or from a athletic testing standpoint, because he hasn't done athletic testing. He's been dealing with that foot injury, and it's kept him off the field. Now he's considered a guy that's not really a concern. This year in the NFL, he's going to be good to go by then. But in the pre-draft process, it's been difficult. All we have are his measurements and not his testing numbers. He's versatile, though, based on his tape. You can tell that this is somebody that you can play inside or out just because of his size and overwhelming power. That's the beauty of his unique physical situation, I guess. He can improve with his technique for sure. So he's more raw. If he had some of the finesse that some of these other smaller guys had, he would be, in my mind, a bona fide top 10 pick. But because he's got some work to do there, I think folks need to wait a little bit on him, frankly. He's easily the biggest outlier from a physical standpoint. But wherever he goes, they need to get him in a gym and, like take a boxing lesson or something, because the way that he uses his hands, the way that he sets his hips, the level that he plays with his pads, it's often just a little bit off. He's not wildly out in left field by any means, but general placement and technique needs some work. I think that it'll be a year or two in the NFL before he reaches that true potential in terms of his technique. But the size, length, play style, it's all good from a statistical standpoint. Really bad first year in college in 2020, but then in 21 and 22 had well above average years. He's got an elite run stop rate of 10%, an elite pass rush win rate north of 20%, 22.3%, and had a relatively consistent year. Started out with one amazing game and then was pretty consistent from there on out. So yeah, I really like him. He's JT. There's another player by the name of Bryce Young in this draft who I have described in this way, but he is in the edge group, the player who my official opinion is, I think they're going to be a really, really good NFL player. And I would really like for a team other than my own to take him. I don't want to take a gamble on him. I'll happily be a fan of his, watch him wreck the league on another team, hopefully a team that doesn't have to play the team that I root for. But it also would not shock me at all if he's one of those guys that you look at his numbers. Our grandkids look at his numbers when they're pulling up the the 2072 mock draftable webs, and then there's a stud in the draft who's compared physically to him, and then folks are like, wait a second, in 2023, Tyree Wilson, look at this guy, look at the size on this guy. Why do I not know this guy is? Why did he flame out? And you're wondering where this guy went, because from a physical standpoint, he had the goods. He concerns me a little bit on that front. Do I think he's going to flame out? No. But of my top 5 guys, if I had to say who's the most likely to be out of the league in 5 years if somebody was a disaster, I'd say it's Tyree Wilson. I just don't. Yeah. I'm at a loss of words a little bit, because I don't know how to describe the conflicting brain of he's so big though, and he might stink though. So let's
move on to the top 3 here. Of course.
Let's talk about the top 3.
And we'll run down our top 3s here, and then I'll let you have the floor, because I think you're just itching to talk about this guy. So with my top 3, of course, just talking about Tyree Wilson. He's my number 3. Number 2, my boy Lukas Van Ness from Iowa, and then of course, no surprise, and I'm assuming no surprise on your list either, Will Anderson from Alabama.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and talk about Will Anderson? We can just get him out of the way. I hate that we end on a boring note with the thing everyone already knew.
Yeah, you want to do Will Anderson, your boy, and then our collective boy.
Yeah. That's exactly what we'll do. So Will Anderson, we'll be brief on him because you've heard all about him, right? He was the projected number 1 overall draft pick after 2 years ago in college. Him and Bryce Young were like, oh, they're going to go 1-2, man. And then we're here, and they still are going to go both top 5, one would imagine. So they live up to the billing. He's been a stud for a very long time. From a measurement standpoint, he brings plenty of everything to the table. If anything, he's a little bit light, but that is, I think, just a result of him playing faster and more ferociously. If he wanted to put on some more weight onto that frame, I think he absolutely could. He's at 253 right now, which is 23rd percentile, but he's almost 6'4", which is right around the 50th percentile. So again, I think he could get bigger if he wanted to. I think his size is more a result of a choice so that he can play faster and a little bit leaner. Arm length, perfectly good, just short of 34-inch arms. His 40-yard dash is nearly the 90th percentile at 4.6 flat. 10-yard split, even better, 1.61. That's the 73rd percentile. There's not a whole lot to even mention from his college statistical achievements, because it's just nonsense. It's incredible. His 2021 season in particular, he was a beast. And I love, JT, how we talk about how, well, yeah, I mean, he'd probably be the number 1 overall pick if he hadn't had a little bit of a step back last year. His step back was, according to PFF, graded at 83.6, which is better than the best year that most any of these other guys have ever had. His best year was almost a 90 overall grade on PFF, which is stupid, 89.8 for his 2021 season. He put up big sack numbers every single year, 8, 15, and 14. His hurry numbers are stupid. 36, 56, and 42, well over almost 150 in his career. And so, yeah, like this guy, he's got all the goods. If you're looking for one thing that he can improve on, it's just his bag. He can improve his diversity from a pass rush standpoint. He didn't have to be a technician at the college level because he just was better than everyone. At the NFL level, he's going to be better than a lot of folks, but he's going to be taught a lot more in terms of diversifying his skill set, having more options and ways that he can approach pass rushing. JT, any thoughts that you have to pile on top of Will Anderson is good discourse?
I was just going to say, like, yeah, he can improve on his like move set and like the variety of moves he has. He probably already has some of those moves. He's just because of the Alabama factor, he didn't have to use them.
They may be deep in his bag. They exist. Yeah, exactly. They're just buried down in there.
Yeah. So, but
no, I agree. Do you want to go ahead and tell me why you hate who I think is the best edge in the class? What did Will McDonald the fifth or the fourth do to you out of Iowa State?
So, of course, I have Will McDonald, I believe, as my 6th overall.
Yeah, not disrespect at all. I'm higher on him than most. Where is he on the consensus board? Because I think you're pretty close to. He is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so you're right in line with the consensus. On the consensus board, he's the 32nd overall player, a first-round pick. I think just barely. He'll go either end of the first, late second. I would take him if I'm a team in the 20s and I need an edge player and I need a a luxury. Like if the Chiefs got him at 30 or 31 or whatever.
I was literally about to say, like,
that's who I mocked him to in my first mock draft.
Yeah,
I'm almost positive.
I think we're playing out a deja vu Groundhog Day scenario where, like, maybe you're right about Will McDonald and he's kind of getting like the George Karlaftis treatment from last year, and in Kansas City says we'll take that guy, and he becomes a stud.
Like, he's a guy that
could happen again,
and it's so frustrating every year. There's these guys who we ignore generally at the top of the draft, and then we get to the draft night, and then they take, it's always a team that was already good, and then, so everybody wants their draft pick to stink because you don't want the good teams to get better, you don't want the rich to get richer, and then they pick them, and everybody's like, oh, how did we let that guy fall? Amazing. How did the NFL let Will McDonald IV fall all the way to the Chiefs? Well, because you bozos didn't pick him. Like, hello, that's how he fell, because you guys didn't value him. And now a team like the Chiefs are going to get a player who you should have been valuing higher, and they're going to get a bona fide stud. JT, to me, part of the reason I have him high is I'm walking on your notes here, but I'm clearly excited about this guy, so I'll shut up. The thing for me that I loved is I think that he has maybe, besides, I'll take Will Anderson out. Besides Will Anderson, he's got the lowest floor to me. I think that he is, if I had to put my money on one of these guys panning out, and you don't have to agree with me, but for me...
You mean lowest ceiling?
No. Did I say lowest?
Yes.
I mean highest floor. I'm not talking about ceiling.
You said floor. Lowest floor, and I'm like, wow. All right. Well,
yes. I think this guy could really suck. No, I think that he's got the lowest floor. If you had to bet on one of these guys being a starting caliber NFL player, besides Will Anderson, I'd bet on Will McDonald. Tell me what your thoughts on him were.
I think I don't disagree with you. I just there wasn't a lot of his tape that super impressed me. And not because it's not impressive. It's just there's a couple other guys who just maybe are a little more fluid and have a little bit more twitch. Like, he's still winning. It's just
it was really good. It just didn't catch your eye is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I think he has a lot of different pieces. Like, he just needs to put it all together. And I think that's the big gamble. Like, can he become the product of everything, that all his tools that he has? And right now, he's winning by just being able to explode off the edge and get around you and bull rush and make one move and get to the quarterback. Now, what happens when he comes up? What happens when he comes up against these NFL caliber linemen who have been doing this for so long? He's got to develop his toolbox a little bit to get around the outside and get to the quarterback. And I think there's just maybe where he is on my board, number 6. I think there's 5 other guys who already have the tools to make that jump at the NFL level above him.
So with Will McDonald, I agree with most everything you said. The things for me that stood out and forced me to say this guy is my second favorite player in this edge class. It's not his measurements, right? His height and his weight are not impressive really at all. His height is 6'3" 5/8", so middle of the road. Weight 239. I think that's besides Nolan Smith out of Georgia, that is the smallest guy that we've talked about on this board. 3rd percentile, very, very light. But I see infinite potential even in his measurement numbers, JT. His wingspan is 82 1/4 inches. That's 80th percentile. His arm length is 34 7/8 inches, 90th percentile. His vertical jump and broad jump, 79th and 98th percentiles respectively. So he's got really great length and really great explosiveness. He doesn't have really great size, but the element of his size that's not great is the element of size that you can change. It's your weight. Imagine this guy's web, his measurements chart is different in that one category. If he had a 50th percentile weight number, right? If he's coming in at 255, 260, 265, and he's 6'4" with 80th and 90th percentile measurements for speed, explosiveness, and length, I think people will be putting this guy much higher. And I think teams are going to have that opportunity available to them. He's got almost 6'4" frame. He can wear more than 240 pounds, guys. I'm 5'8" on a very good day, 5'9" on a very good day, 5'8" on an average day. And it is, if I wanted to, I could wear close to 240 on my frame. So I know at 6'4", this guy absolutely can athletically wear 260 on. He can put 20 more pounds on. I'm not sure teams will want to, though. If you want to make him a wide 9 defensive end, then you may not need to. If you want to make him an off-ball linebacker, a 3-4 stand-up outside linebacker, you definitely wouldn't have to. He's got the traits to be super, super versatile in that way. He's an excellent speed rusher. When he's on the line, he's got his hand in the dirt. That's what he's doing. He's rushing the passer with speed. If I had to point out one trait of his that I need him to improve on, and the reason why he's not better in my mind, is that play strength. He's not weak by any means, but he understands leverage very well, and that is something that he uses to, I think, cover up the fact that he's not as strong as a lot of his opponents. He doesn't have the weight to put behind the push that his opponents might have, so that's another part of it as well. But the explosiveness just can't be overstated. His ability to test tackle's ability to contain the edge and match his speed upfield in a hurry, it is in the blink of an eye. This guy flies up the field just like Nolan Smith in a lot of ways. And so I think that this is a guy that absolutely can be a stud 3-down player. I think that he could be somebody that runs the NFL in terms of being the player that we talk about for defensive player of the year, because he's got crazy sack numbers, crazy hurry numbers. He can disrupt in a way that a lot of the other guys I just don't think can. I think that his overall ceiling in terms of disruptiveness is the highest outside of Will Anderson Jr., and that's why I love him so much.
Let's get on to our final defensive edge of the day here.
Oh, the Iowa boys. The Iowa boys. We have got a soft spot in our heart for the Iowa boys. JT, this is the guy that was your guy. And I think later that same day, Jack Campbell actually became your guy. And you're like, oh, they're both Iowa guys. I just love this Iowa class.
Yeah.
And it is Lukas Van Ness, Hercules, as they call him, his teammates call him. I'll go ahead and give a couple of notes on him and then cede the floor to you, because he's my edge 3. He's your edge 2. And he's the guy that has been your guy in terms of, besides Will Anderson, who is the best edge in this class. Dude's got it. Okay. He is White Lightning, and it is a fitting place for him to have played at Iowa. Now, he wasn't ever technically a starter. This has been talked about a lot in the pre-draft process. That's because at Iowa, they're a little old school that way. They have the older veteran players, even though they're sometimes worse than the players under them in seniority. They let them start. And so guys like Van Ness, who just played 2 years, he's well, maybe 3 actually. He was a redshirt senior, but he was playing behind some guys that have been playing. So he played 3 years there. He was playing behind some 4- and 5-year guys. And, actually, that is the wrong player. Did Van Ness play that many years? He played, no. So just 2 years. I was right. I was looking at the wrong guy. So he is a sophomore who played just 2 years. And the important distinction here is, while, yeah, he didn't technically start, he did see the field on basically every single important snap. So he was, for all intents and purposes, their starter. He just didn't literally start the game. He's a versatile guy for sure. He played nearly all of this past season as a 3 technique for Iowa, and then kicked outside more often. Or excuse me, he played all of 2 years ago as a 3 technique, and then kicked outside more often this past year. He's got that JJ Watt element to him as well, in the sense that he's somebody that I think is versatile enough to play inside or out on the defensive line. At 272 and 6'5", his height and weight are both the 71st and 70th percentile. His arm length is 69th percentile at 34-inch arms. He's got great speed, 4.58 second 40-yard dash. That's the 91st percentile. His 3-cone, broad jump, vertical jump, all of the explosive numbers are very nice, except for his vertical. But he's a white boy edge. He's not gonna have hops. Give him a break, right? He's got very good pad level. That's probably the reason that he wins as much as he does, because despite being 6'5", a towering mountain of a man, at 272 he just gets low and out leverages you. The thing that he needed to improve most for me on tape was adding other moves to his bag. He's not super versatile as an outside of being a bull rusher. He was a bull rusher, and you don't blame him really for repeatedly going back to that over and over. That being said, NFL offensive linemen are much more prepared to handle that kind of thing. You're not afforded the luxury of being able to just out physical your opponents. That's what he did a lot in college. He's going to have to learn ways to outsmart as well as out physical his opponents in the NFL.
And I don't think that's a terrible gripe about him, because he is one of the younger guys in the class. Like he's already this good, and
he's not even 22 years old.
Even given time to grow and develop, he can become that guy. I was reading of course, day one of the Beast being out, of course, I go to my guys in the draft, and I loved the
Beast. You mean, is that where you're looking at?
Okay. I love the comp that Dame Brugler gave him. He called him a grizzly bear, and I was like,
that was the comp. Yes. American grizzly bear,
the American grizzly bear, and I'm like, yes, that's dude's just a run stopper. He's a run stuffer. He like. I don't want to say he's like, as I look into him more, he's like a Mike Vrabel guy that he would salivate to have on that defense. But
I think Iowa culture is just really in line with Mike Vrabel culture. Yeah, so I think he'd get along with all the Iowa guys.
But his versatility of being able to play inside and outside is definitely a plus. Last season had 46 pressures and 9 sacks. This past season, not starting. So like you can be one of these nerdy guys, pull up your glasses and be like, oh, he's not a starter.
Yeah,
well,
he didn't start.
46 pressures and still had 9 sacks. Not being a starter.
Just shy of 500 defensive snaps in 13 games. That's about as close to a starter as you can be without being a starter. So yeah.
I think he's got great power in his bull rush. He's shifty, but like you were saying, if you have a downside, he kind of is a one-trick pony on the outside right now. And he's young and he's a little inexperienced, but I think if the right team takes him, and he might not be right out of the gate the top 5 edge player, but like give him some time. I am just so high on him that like I'll say that like 2 or 3 years down the road, we could be looking at him as a premier edge.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I think we could be. The only other thing that I'd say in terms of knock that I forgot to mention is his ability to perform in the run game is a little bit lacking, containing the edge, being a run stopper in that way. He's got some work to be done. But in terms of just being a physical freak, and he and Tyree Wilson are those two guys that their ceiling from a physical standpoint is the moon. It is really, really, really great. And it is also really, really great that, hey, we're done. And we are down to just one more position on the defensive side of the ball until we get to move on to the offensive guys who we are very excited. I mean, we do a lot of prep for these shows. I'm excited to get past the defensive guys because I'll have to do less and less prep the day of because I've got so many notes on these offensive guys already. So excited for that. Just to wrap it up with a bow here, our top 10 defensive edge defenders, as they're called by all the people that are smart in the NFL. The edge defenders in this class, our top 10. This is JT's board. His edge 10 is Keion White out of Georgia Tech. Edge 9, Felix and Anidike-Uzomah out of Kansas State. Edge 8, Adetomiwa Adebawore. Edge 7, BJ Ojulari. Edge 6, Will McDonald. Edge 5, Myles Murphy out of Clemson. Edge 4, Nolan Smith out of Georgia. Edge 3, Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. Edge 2, Lukas Van Ness out of Iowa. And Edge 1, Will Anderson Jr. out of Alabama. My top 10 edge players. And I skipped one. Adetomiwa Adebawore out of Northwestern is my edge 10. Felix and Anidike-Uzomah out of Kansas State is my edge 9. Edge 8, Myles Murphy out of Clemson. Edge 7, BJ Ojulari out of LSU. Edge 6, Keion White out of Georgia Tech. Edge 5, Nolan Smith out of Georgia. Edge 4, Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. Edge 3, Lukas Van Ness out of Iowa. Edge 2, Will McDonald the fourth out of Iowa State. And Edge 1, Will Anderson Jr. out of Alabama. JT, appreciate you being with me today. Appreciate all of our listeners being with us today. Just a heads up, before you leave us, make sure you're liking, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show. Very helpful to us. It's draft season. We're in full swing. We're doing shows every day. So make sure to share the shows with your friends. If you've got friends that are big NFL fans, people that are interested in the draft, want to learn a little bit more about the draft and aren't sure how to, send them this show. It's very helpful for us from a grassroots standpoint if you spread the show around. So I know you got some friends that like the Titans. Send it out to them. And we would appreciate that. Just a rundown, a reminder, the shows that are already out, that now that this one's about to end, you should be queuing up next. The 3 positions we've already touched on: defensive tackles, safeties, and linebackers. All 3 of those episodes are the last 3 episodes on this podcast feed. So go back and find those and watch those to learn about the best players at those positions. Just so you know what's coming up this week on the Hot Read podcast feed, we've got 3 more episodes for you that are going to drop the next 3 mornings. So Wednesday morning, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, tomorrow morning, check out our top 10 interior offensive linemen episode with 2 special guests who are also going to be joining us for our Thursday morning episode episode, the top 10 offensive tackles in this draft class. Titans fans, if you've been ignoring or putting on the back burner these top 10 episodes for positions, now is the time to tune in. This is the time, if you're going to only listen to 2 of these episodes, or 3 of them, make it the wide receiver and the 2 offensive line episodes, because those are the guys that this Titans team needs the most. We'll be covering those 2 groups in the next 2 days, and then capping the week off on Friday morning with my mock draft 2.0, which I am writing and very excited to talk about. As we mentioned at the top of the show today, I think the mocks, generally speaking, are going to be very wrong. I'm going to try to get ahead of that curve by thinking outside of the box a little bit. I've got some interesting fits for some interesting players, so we'll discuss all of that on Friday. 2 more top 10s coming for you in the next 2 days. And until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.